If that's your Ferrari, I'll quit. Officer Kane Ryder barked loud enough for every porch on Mercy Street to hear. Calder Thorne stood with his palms pressed against the red hood, the metal warm beneath his fingers, the cuffs already cutting into his wrists. A man shows up here driving a car worth more than this block and expects me to believe it? Ryder laughed, dangling Calder's keys like stolen evidence. He shoved Calder harder against the Ferrari, close enough for Calder to smell stale coffee and contempt on his breath. Calder's jaw tightened, yet he said nothing. Behind his silence was the kind of restraint Ryder mistook for fear, a steady calm forged by years of injustice. Ryder did not know the man he was humiliating owned the Ferrari, the building, and the evidence that could end his badge. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because the next story is one you cannot miss. The Ferrari's engine purred as Calder Thorne eased it to the curb in front of Hattie Cole's brick home. The car's bright red color stood out against the weathered houses of Mercy Street, like a cardinal among sparrows. Calder adjusted his crisp green suit before stepping out. The suit wasn't for show. It had been Naomi's favorite color on him. "That boy still dresses like he's going to Sunday service," he heard someone say, and spotted Mrs. Watson peering from her window next door. Calder smiled and gave her a polite wave. His smile faded when he saw the bright orange paper stuck to Hattie's front door. Another violation notice. The third one this month. Calder strode purposefully toward the porch steps, his polished shoes crunching on the gravel path. Before his foot touched the first step, blue and red lights flashed in his peripheral vision, reflecting off the windows of nearby homes. A police cruiser had pulled up behind his Ferrari, lights spinning, but no siren. Officer Kane Ryder emerged, adjusting his belt with a deliberate slowness that Calder recognized all too well. The posturing of a man who enjoyed making others wait. "Afternoon, officer," Calder called, keeping his voice steady and respectful. Ryder approached with his hand resting on his holster. "Want to tell me what you're doing in a car like that in this neighborhood?" Calder felt the familiar weight settle in his chest, the one that appeared whenever he had to explain himself, prove himself, justify his existence in spaces where others moved freely. "I'm visiting Ms. Cole," he replied, gesturing toward the house. "I grew up not far from here." "License and registration," Ryder demanded, his eyes narrowing. "That vehicle been reported?" "No, sir, it hasn't. The car is mine." Calder reached slowly for his wallet. "Registration's in the glove compartment," he added, moving toward the passenger door. "Stop right there." Ryder's voice hardened. "Step away from the vehicle." Doors opened up and down the street. Neighbors emerged onto porches and sidewalks, watching silently. Someone held up a phone, recording. "Officer, I'm just getting the registration like you asked," Calder explained, hands visible. "I didn't tell you to open that car," Ryder snapped. "For all I know, you've got a weapon in there." The front door of Hattie's house swung open. Hattie Cole stood in the doorway, all of her radiating indignation. "Kane Ryder, what in God's name are you doing?" she demanded, making her way down her steps with surprising quickness. "Stay back, Miss Cole. Police business," Ryder called without looking at her. "Police foolishness is what it is." Hattie planted herself at the edge of her yard. "That boy grew up 3 doors down. You know exactly who he is." Ryder ignored her, focusing on Calder. "Hands on the hood, sir," Calder complied, placing his palms flat against the warm metal of his Ferrari. The car Naomi had insisted he buy before she got sick. "Something to make you smile when life gets heavy," she'd said. "Officer," Calder said quietly, "if you'll just let me show you." "You're being evasive." Ryder cut him off. "You've been drinking today?" "No, sir." "Because I'm getting a lot of attitude and I smell alcohol." Calder knew the lie for what it was. He hadn't touched a drop in years. Not since Naomi. "That's a damn lie," Hattie called out. More phones appeared in neighbors' hands. "This is harassment." "One more word, and you're interfering with an officer, Ms. Cole," Ryder warned. "What crime am I suspected of committing, Officer Ryder?" Calder asked, his voice calm despite the anger building in his chest. "Turn around," Ryder ordered, ignoring the question. "Hands behind your back." "Officer, you are making a mistake," Calder said, still controlled but firm. Ryder grabbed Calder's wrist, twisting it as he spun him around. The movement was unnecessarily rough, designed to provoke resistance. Calder didn't give him the satisfaction. Ryder smirked, then pointed at the Ferrari and laughed loudly enough for the gathering crowd to hear. "If that's your Ferrari, I'll quit," he announced mockingly. The handcuffs snapped cold and tight around Calder's wrists. Too tight, biting into his skin. A deliberate discomfort. The neighborhood fell into stunned silence. No one moved, except to keep recording. Mrs. Watson covered her mouth with her hand. Mr. Townsend, a retired postal worker, shook his head slowly. Hattie stood trembling with rage, her eyes filled with tears of frustration. Calder stood tall despite the humiliation, despite the cuffs cutting into his flesh. He stared straight ahead, his face a carefully composed mask that revealed nothing of the storm inside him. The Ferrari gleamed in the afternoon sun as Ryder pushed Calder against it, treating him like a common criminal in front of the very community that had watched him grow up. Officer Ryder patted Calder down with rough, invasive movements. His hand slapped against Calder's sides and legs with unnecessary force. A younger officer stood nearby, shifting his weight from one foot to another, his name badge reading Croft. "Nothing in the pockets but a wallet and keys," Ryder announced, pulling them out and dangling the Ferrari key fob for everyone to see. "Well, look at that. A fancy key to go with the fancy story." "It's mine," Calder said quietly. "As I've been trying to tell you." Ryder gave another cruel chuckle, but this time the laughter sounded thinner, meaner, more performative. He lifted the key fob toward the watching neighbors, like it was evidence in a trial. "You hear that?" Ryder called out. "He wants us all to believe he rolled up here in a car worth more than most houses on this block, and we're supposed to just nod along." Officer Croft looked down at his shoes, clearly uncomfortable with the spectacle his partner was creating. "The registration is in the glove compartment," Calder said, his voice steady despite the handcuffs digging into his wrists. "You're welcome to check it." Ryder leaned close enough for Calder to smell the stale coffee on his breath. "Oh, I'll check it," he said. "But first, we're going to find out what else you're hiding behind that calm little act." He forced Calder to lean forward against the hood of the Ferrari. The metal felt warm against Calder's chest. The position was deliberately humiliating, displayed like a criminal against his own car, while neighbors recorded the scene on their phones. Hattie stepped off her porch, her spine straight. "This has gone far enough, Kane Ryder. You've known this man since he was a child." "Step back, Ms. Cole," Ryder warned, not even turning to face her. "Unless you want a citation for interfering with police business." "Interfering with foolishness is what I'd be doing," Hattie shot back. But she stopped at the edge of her yard, hands trembling with rage. Croft finally spoke up, though his voice came out softer than he probably intended. "Should I run the plates, sir?" "Already called it in," Ryder said, opening the driver's door of the Ferrari. "Dispatch says there might be an alert out for a vehicle matching this description." "What's the alert specifically for?" Calder asked. "Red sports car, possibly stolen from Highland Park area," Ryder said smugly. "A Ferrari 812 GTS is not just a red sports car," Calder pointed out. "And Highland Park is a long way from here." "You seem to know a lot about stolen vehicles," Ryder said, rifling through the glove compartment. Calder took a slow, deep breath. "I'd like your badge number, Officer Ryder. And yours as well, Officer Croft." Croft looked startled at being addressed directly. "You want my badge number?" Ryder laughed again, pulling out the vehicle registration. "You'll have plenty of time to memorize it on the way to the station." He glanced at the registration, his expression flickering for just a moment before hardening again. He quickly stuffed the paper into his pocket. "What are the charges?" Calder asked calmly. "Obstruction of justice, for starters," Ryder said, his voice rising. possibly resisting arrest without violence. I haven't resisted anything, Calder pointed out. Your attitude is resistance enough, Ryder snapped, clearly frustrated by Calder's composure. And we'll see what else comes up when we get to the station. More neighbors had gathered now. Mrs. Watson, from 2 doors down, was openly weeping. Mr. Townsend stood with his arms folded, shaking his head slowly. At least a dozen phones were recording everything. "Kane, this isn't right," someone called from across the street. "You know it isn't." "Anyone interfering will be cited," Ryder announced to the crowd. "Officer Croft, secure the vehicle. We'll have it towed for evidence." Croft hesitated. "Don't we need a warrant for the probable cause?" "Do as I say," Ryder cut him off. Ryder grabbed Calder's arm and marched him toward the patrol car. Calder didn't resist, but he didn't lower his head either. He walked with as much dignity as the handcuffs would allow. "Call Vivian Cross," Calder called to Hattie as he passed. "Her number is in my phone. You'll get your phone call at the station," Ryder said, shoving Calder's head down as he pushed him into the back seat of the cruiser. Through the window, Calder watched Hattie clutch her porch railing, her face a mixture of fury and fear. The Ferrari sat abandoned on Mercy Street, gleaming defiantly in the afternoon sun, as Officer Croft stood awkwardly beside it, avoiding the stares of the neighbors. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Calder sat on a hard metal bench at the precinct booking desk. His wrists ached from the too tight cuffs that Officer Ryder had deliberately fastened with extra force. The station hummed with activity, phones ringing, keyboards clicking, officers moving between desks with coffee cups and file folders. Ryder stood a few feet away, leaning against a filing cabinet with a smirk on his face. He was performing for a small audience of 2 other officers. "So there he is, standing next to this Ferrari like he owns it," Ryder said, chuckling. "Wearing this fancy green suit in the middle of Mercy Street. Like we're all supposed to believe that's his car." The officers laughed on cue. One of them glanced at Calder with undisguised contempt. "Big dreams and borrowed cars," Ryder continued. "Tale as old as time." Officer Croft stood apart from the group, fidgeting with his notepad and avoiding eye contact with everyone. The desk sergeant, a heavy-set man with salt and pepper hair, typed Calder's information into the computer system. "Registration check on the Ferrari is coming back now," he announced. Ryder sauntered over. "Let me guess. Reported stolen last week." The sergeant squinted at his screen. "No. Vehicle is registered to Calder Thorne. Address matches driver's license." He looked up with surprise. "It's his car." A hush fell over the room. Several officers turned to stare at Calder, then at Ryder. Ryder's face reddened. "That doesn't change the obstruction charge. He was aggressive and uncooperative during a legitimate stop." "I was neither aggressive nor uncooperative," Calder said calmly. "And I believe Officer Croft knows that." All eyes turned to Croft, who suddenly became intensely interested in his shoes. "Registration could be faked," Ryder insisted. "Run a deeper check." The desk sergeant tapped more keys. His eyebrows shot up. "Mr. Thorne is the owner of Thorne Renewable Infrastructure, Inc. And—" He paused, looking directly at Ryder. "He's the owner of the old Mercy Street Community Center building, the one where tonight's redevelopment hearing is being held." The room fell silent again, this time with a different quality, the quiet of people realizing a serious mistake had been made. "That's impossible," Ryder muttered. "His foundation purchased it last year," the sergeant continued, "and according to this press release, the Thorne Foundation is scheduled to announce a senior housing assistance program at tonight's meeting." Ryder's smirk had completely vanished. He was still interfering with, "I'd like my phone call now," Calder interrupted. The desk sergeant nodded and slid a desk phone toward him. Calder dialed Vivian Cross's number from memory. When she answered, he spoke clearly enough for everyone to hear. "Vivian, it's Calder Thorne. I've been arrested by Officer Kane Ryder at the North Precinct on charges of obstruction and resisting arrest without violence. The Ferrari has been impounded as evidence. Yes, that Officer Ryder. I'll wait here." He hung up and stared directly at Ryder. My attorney will be here shortly." Heavy footsteps approached from the hallway, and Captain Harlan Crow entered the room. Tall and imposing in his crisp uniform, Crow surveyed the scene with practiced neutrality. "What's the situation here?" he asked, his voice smooth and controlled. Ryder moved quickly to Crow's side, speaking in hushed tones. Calder couldn't hear everything, but he caught fragments. "Suspicious behavior and attitude problem, and just doing my job." Crow nodded, his face betraying nothing. He glanced at Calder, then back to Ryder. The look that passed between them told Calder everything he needed to know. The department would close ranks. Ryder stepped away from Crow, moving toward the coffee machine. As he passed another officer, Calder clearly heard him mutter, "He was at Cole's house, same old lady from the list." The list. Calder committed the phrase to memory. Crow approached him with a professional smile that never reached his eyes. "Mr. Thorne, there appears to have been a misunderstanding. We'll be processing your release immediately." "And my car?" Calder asked. "We'll have it returned to you, of course," Crow said. "These things happen in the interest of public safety." "These things," Calder repeated slowly. "You mean false arrests?" Crow's smile tightened. "The paperwork will show this was a brief investigative detention, not an arrest. No charges will be filed." A short while later, Calder walked out of the precinct into the late afternoon sun. No apology had been offered. His personal items had been returned in a plastic bag, like he was collecting trash. The red marks on his wrists from the handcuffs had deepened to purple. Vivienne Cross waited by her car, a tall black woman with close-cropped hair and a tailored pantsuit. Her expression was a controlled fury as she examined the marks on Calder's wrists. "I want their badges," she said flatly. "I heard something else in there," Calder replied. "Something about a list with Hattie's name on it." He looked back at the station. This wasn't just about me and that car. The sun hung low in the sky, painting Mercy Street in long shadows as Vivian's sedan pulled away from the precinct. Calder sat quietly in the passenger seat, rubbing his wrists where the handcuffs had left angry red marks. "We can file for wrongful detention," Vivian said, her eyes fixed on the road. Ryder had no probable cause. The Ferrari wasn't even close to matching any stolen vehicle report. Calder nodded, but seemed distracted. "There's something bigger happening. When I was leaving, I heard Ryder say something about Hattie being on the list." "What list?" Vivian's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "That's what we need to find out," Calder said. The way he said it, like it was something they all knew about, something organized. They turned onto Fifth Avenue, where the impound lot stood behind a chain-link fence. The Ferrari looked out of place among the dented sedans and abandoned trucks. "I'll wait," Vivian said as Calder got out. A short while, and several $100s later, Calder drove his car out of the impound lot, following Vivian through the neighborhood streets. They passed rows of modest homes with deep porches, some freshly painted, others showing their age. Calder knew every block. He'd grown up here, played here, left here, and now returned as both a stranger and a son. They pulled up to a brick townhouse with green shutters on a quiet side street. Calder's temporary home since returning to the city after Naomi's death. "I need a few minutes," he told Vivian as they walked inside. "There's something I need to check." The townhouse was sparsely furnished. A couch, a dining table, a few lamps, not much else. Calder hadn't bothered making it feel like home. He headed straight for the second bedroom he used as an office, where cardboard boxes lined one wall. Naomi's boxes, her files, her work. His throat tightened as he knelt beside them. A year after her death, and still he could smell her perfume when he opened them. Calder. Vivian stood in the doorway, watching him with concern. Naomi was working on something before the accident, he said, pulling out folders. Housing cases, elderly residents. She mentioned Hattie a few times. Calder spread the files across the floor. Vivian knelt beside him, helping sort through the papers. There were complaint forms, handwritten notes, maps of the neighborhood with certain blocks highlighted. Here, Vivian said, holding up a folder labeled Mercy Street Senior Residence. Inside were profiles of a dozen elderly homeowners. Hattie Cole's information was on top, her address circled in bright red ink. Next to it, Naomi had written, "Third visit from Officer R. No actual violation." "Look at this," Calder said, finding a yellow legal pad. Naomi's handwriting covered the pages with observations and questions. Code violations spike after developer inquiry. Same officer responds to complaints. Pattern: citation, police visit. Then offer to buy. Who coordinates the timing? Calder's hands trembled slightly as he turned the pages. She knew. Naomi was tracking this pattern before she died. "The timing," Vivian said quietly. 3 houses on Hattie's block sold for below market last year, all after code violations. Calder found a folder of newspaper clippings about a redevelopment initiative sponsored by Councilwoman Amara Quinn. The same initiative being discussed at tonight's community meeting. "It's not just about racism or a cop who couldn't believe I owned that car," Calder said, his voice hardening. "Ryder was already on Hattie's street for a reason. My showing up there disrupted something they've been doing for months." Vivian gathered several key documents. Naomi was building a case. She thought the police were helping pressure people to sell, Calder said quietly. And then she died, and I was too broken to notice what was happening right in front of me. He pulled out a photo tucked into one of the folders. Naomi standing on Hattie's porch, her arm around the older woman's shoulders. Both were smiling. On the back, Naomi had written, "We protect our elders, or we lose our soul." Calder stared at his wife's handwriting, feeling a familiar ache in his chest, but now mingled with something else. Purpose. Clarity. "The community center meeting starts soon," Vivian said, checking the time. Calder gathered the most important documents and slid them into his leather briefcase. He touched the photo of Naomi one last time before adding it to the case. "I was supposed to announce the senior housing fund tonight," he said, rising to his feet. "Now it seems even more necessary than I thought." He straightened his green suit jacket, the same one he'd been wearing during his arrest. The same color Naomi had loved. "Ready?" Vivian asked. Calder nodded, picking up his briefcase. The papers inside weren't just files now. They were Naomi's unfinished work, her legacy. And somehow his humiliation at Ryder's hands had given him the key to continuing what she'd started. "Let's go," he said. The old Mercy Street Community Center had seen better days. Water stains marked the ceiling tiles, and the wooden floor creaked under every footstep. But tonight, the main meeting room was packed. Neighbors filled every folding chair, stood against walls, and spilled into the hallway. The air felt heavy with tension. Calder paused at the entrance, adjusting his green suit jacket to cover the raw marks on his wrists where Ryder's handcuffs had dug into his skin. It hadn't been enough time for bruises to fully form, but the red welts told their story. Several residents nodded at him with quiet respect. Others whispered behind their hands. "You okay?" Vivian asked quietly. Calder gave a short nod. "I'm better than okay. I'm ready." He moved toward the front, where a small table held a microphone and a pitcher of water. Councilwoman Amara Quinn sat there in a tailored gray suit, her smile professional as she chatted with 2 men in expensive ties, representatives from Eastland Development Group. They stopped talking when Calder approached. "Mr. Thorne," Quinn said, her voice perfectly balanced between warmth and formality. "I heard about your unfortunate misunderstanding with Officer Ryder. I do hope everything has been resolved satisfactorily." "Nothing about false arrest is satisfactory, Councilwoman," Calder replied, his voice low but firm. Quinn's smile tightened. "Well, we're here to talk about progress tonight, not problems." At the appointed hour, Quinn called the meeting to order. She spoke about revitalization and urban renewal while showing slides of gleaming apartment complexes and landscaped walkways. Words like community and future peppered her speech, but Calder noticed she never once mentioned the people currently living in the neighborhood. When his turn came to speak, Calder approached the microphone. The residents quieted, many leaning forward in their chairs. "My foundation was planning to announce something tonight," he began, his deep voice filling the room. "Recent events have only strengthened my resolve." He made brief eye contact with faces he recognized. Mrs. Jenkins, who taught him in 3rd grade. Reverend Wallace, who had buried his parents. Hattie, who sat in the 3rd row clutching a white envelope. "Effective immediately, the Thorne Foundation is doubling our emergency repair fund for senior homeowners on Mercy Street. Any resident over 65 facing code violations can apply for assistance." He paused as applause rippled through the room. "These are homes, not just properties. These are neighbors, not obstacles." Hattie dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Others nodded vigorously or clasped hands. Quinn's smile had vanished completely. She whispered something to the developer beside her, then took back the microphone. "That's certainly generous, Mr. Thorne," she said. "However, we must address urgent safety concerns that private grants may not adequately resolve. That's why I'm introducing an emergency redevelopment proposal tonight." She clicked to a new slide showing a legal document. "This measure creates an expedited review process for properties with unresolved code violations. Owners will have 30 days to bring properties into full compliance, after which the city can begin condemnation proceedings for public safety." A heavy silence fell over the room, broken only by a few gasps. "30 days," Mrs. Jenkins called out, "to fix everything." "This is highway robbery," someone shouted from the back. Calder scanned the crowd and noticed Captain Harlan Crow standing near the exit, arms folded across his chest, watching the scene unfold with calculated interest. Their eyes met briefly before Crow looked away. Hattie raised a trembling hand, and Quinn reluctantly acknowledged her. "I received this today," Hattie said, holding up her envelope. "It says I need a new roof, new porch supports, and electrical updates. $20,000 of work in 30 days. Her voice shook with anger. "I worked 40 years as a nurse. I've owned that house for 35 years. How am I supposed to do all this in a month?" Others began standing, holding similar envelopes. "Mine came yesterday. Same violations, word for word. They're trying to steal our homes." Quinn tapped the microphone. "Please, everyone. This is about safety, not ownership changes. If you can't afford repairs, there are always willing buyers." "Like the men sitting next to you," Calder interrupted, stepping back to the front. The room erupted in angry voices. Calder raised his hands for quiet. "I promise everyone in this room," he said, his voice steady and sure. "The 30-day clock stops now. We will fight this." Vivian moved quietly through the crowd, notepad in hand, collecting violation notices from residents who reached out to her. She made her way row by row, documenting each case, building their defense. "Mr. Thorne doesn't speak for the city council," Quinn said sharply. "No," Calder replied. "I speak for Mercy Street, and we're not going anywhere." The night after the heated community meeting, Hattie barely slept. By dawn, she was already at her kitchen table, organizing violation notices with shaking hands. The $20,000 estimate for repairs might as well have been $20 million. At the appointed hour, her doorbell rang. Calder stood on her porch wearing a simple button-down shirt instead of yesterday's suit. Beside him, Vivian Cross balanced a leather portfolio and digital recorder. "Did you sleep at all?" Hattie asked, noticing the shadows under Calder's eyes. "Not much," he admitted, "but we don't have time to waste." Inside Hattie's living room, they spread a neighborhood map across her coffee table. Red circles marked homes with violation notices. "We need to document everything," Vivian explained, checking her recorder. "Every notice, every police visit, every buyout offer. Dates, times, names. Times. We'll go door to door," Calder added. "People will talk to you while you, Hattie. They trust you." Hattie nodded firmly. "Then let's get walking." Their first stop was 3 doors down at Bernard Hale's small brick home. The older widower answered in a cardigan despite the warm morning. His lawn was neatly trimmed, his walkway recently swept. "Mr. Hale, we need to talk about your violation notices," Hattie said gently. Bernard hesitated, eyeing Vivian's recorder with suspicion. "I don't like trouble." "This isn't about making trouble," Calder assured him. "It's about stopping it." Inside, Bernard's home was spotless but frozen in time. Family photos from decades past. Furniture well-maintained but aged. He retrieved a folder from beneath his recliner. "Started last month," he explained, spreading out official-looking papers. "First it was the gutters. I fixed those. Then it was the porch railing." Vivian examined the notice. $3,800 for a railing replacement. "That's outrageous." Bernard nodded sadly. "Man from the city said it wasn't up to code, but I built that railing myself years ago. It's solid oak." Calder tested the railing. It didn't budge. "Did anyone offer to buy your house after the violations?" 3 different people, Bernard confirmed. "Last one came 2 days ago. Offered cash. Said I should take it before the city condemned the place." Vivian recorded every detail while Hattie held the old man's hand. "This was where Margaret and I raised our children," Bernard said, voice cracking. "I can't just leave." By mid-morning, they'd visited 6 more homes. The pattern was unmistakable. Selena Vargas, a retired schoolteacher, invited them into her immaculate living room. Unlike Bernard, she had evidence meticulously organized in labeled folders. "Once a teacher, always a teacher," she explained with dignity. "I document everything." Celine showed them a calendar marking police visits. "Officer Ryder parked outside twice last week, just sitting there with his lights off until nearly midnight." "After you refused to sell?" Vivian asked. "Exactly. The developer called Monday, offering $120,000. Celine laughed bitterly. "This house is worth twice that. My husband and I paid it off years ago." Calder looked at the wall of family photos. "What did Ryder say when he came to your door?" "Claimed there were reports of suspicious activity. But he was looking at my house, not for criminals." Celine's voice hardened. "I taught for 35 years. I know intimidation when I see it." By late afternoon, they had visited 14 homes. Vivian spread the documents across Hattie's dining table, organizing them chronologically. "Look at the timeline," she said, pointing. "Code violations increased 300% after Quinn's redevelopment proposal went to committee. These aren't random inspections." Hattie sank into a chair. "They're trying to force us all out at once." Calder stepped onto Hattie's porch, measuring the awning. "I'm installing a security camera. If Ryder shows up again, we'll have it recorded." "He's been here before," Hattie admitted quietly. 2 nights last week. Said he was doing welfare checks on seniors." "At 11 at night?" Calder asked, mounting a small black camera beneath the porch light. "Exactly. Just standing there, flashlight in my face, asking if I'd considered my options." Hattie shuddered. I've never been so scared in my own home. As evening approached, Calder connected the camera to Hattie's Wi-Fi. This will send footage directly to a secure cloud account. If anyone comes, don't answer unless you know them. I'm not hiding in my own house, Hattie insisted. Not hiding, Vivian corrected, gathering evidence. Calder finished the installation as sunset painted Mercy Street in amber light. Call me immediately if anything happens, he told Hattie, day or night. As he descended Hattie's porch steps, a white police cruiser rolled slowly down Mercy Street. Officer Ryder was behind the wheel, driving deliberately below the speed limit. He didn't stop or flash his lights, just cruised past, eyes fixed on Calder and Hattie's porch. Calder stood perfectly still, watching the patrol car continue down the block before turning the corner. The camera's running, he said quietly to Hattie. Let him come. Hattie sat in her armchair, an open photo album across her lap. The pictures showed a younger version of herself standing proudly beside her late husband in front of the very same house decades earlier. The mortgage-burning party, their faces beaming with accomplishment after years of payments. She traced her finger over her husband's smile. We did it, Charles, she whispered. Nobody's taking our home. The quiet moment shattered when bright headlights swept across her living room curtains, flooding the space with harsh white light. Hattie stiffened. A car door slammed outside. Heavy footsteps thumped up her porch steps, followed by 3 loud, aggressive knocks that seemed designed to intimidate rather than announce. Hattie set the album aside and stood slowly, her knees protesting. She didn't need to check who it was. The knocking pattern alone, authoritative, demanding, told her everything. The pounding came again, harder this time. Police! Open up, Mrs. Cole! Hattie smoothed her house dress, took a steadying breath, and opened the door just enough to peer through. Officer Ryder stood on her porch, flashlight in hand despite the porch light being on. He aimed the beam directly at her face. Can I help you, officer? Hattie asked, squinting against the glare. Got a noise complaint about this address, Ryder said, his tone flat and unconvincing. Hattie didn't blink. A noise complaint? I've been sitting alone looking at old photographs. Mind if I step in and check things out? Without waiting for permission, Ryder pushed the door wider and moved onto her porch. I do mind, Hattie said, but he was already past her. The house sat in perfect silence except for the ticking of her grandfather clock in the hallway. No television, no radio, nothing that could possibly disturb neighbors. Ryder made a show of looking around. Funny thing about these old houses, he said, tapping his flashlight against his palm. They're not up to code anymore. City's concerned about safety. My house is just fine, Hattie replied, standing her ground. Been here 52 years without incident. Ryder's false smile disappeared. Look, Mrs. Cole, you should know the developer's offer isn't going to improve. 3 other homeowners on this block already sold. Smart ones always go first. Is this why you're really here? To pressure me into selling my home? I'm here because I care about this neighborhood, Ryder said, his voice hardening. The city will handle things the hard way if necessary. Condemnation proceedings aren't pleasant. Hattie's heart pounded, but decades of working as a nurse had taught her never to show fear. My home is not for sale. Not to developers, not to the city, not to anyone. Ryder stepped closer. You're making a mistake. The only mistake was opening my door to you without a witness present, Hattie said. Ryder's eyes darted to the corner of the porch ceiling where Calder's camera was mounted. His expression darkened. What's this? He growled, moving toward it. Security camera, Hattie said. My property, my right. This is interference with police activity, Ryder snapped. He raised his heavy flashlight and struck the camera with a sickening crack. Plastic and electronic components scattered across Hattie's porch. Hattie gasped. That's destruction of private property. That's a public safety violation, Ryder countered, pointing his flashlight back in her face. Electronic devices improperly installed create fire hazards. He leaned in, voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "Final warning, Mrs. Cole. Take the money while it's still being offered." Hattie's hands trembled, but her voice remained steady. "Get off my porch, officer. Now!" Ryder smiled coldly. "Have it your way." He stepped back, crushing camera pieces under his boot deliberately. "Expect a citation for the improper electronic installation. And maybe a few more things we find wrong next inspection." Hattie watched, heart hammering in her chest, as Ryder walked back to his patrol car. She waited until his taillights disappeared around the corner before letting her brave facade crumble. Her hands shook violently as she reached for her phone and pressed Calder's number. "He was here," she said. When Calder answered, "Ryder, he smashed your camera." A short while later, Calder's Ferrari purred to a stop in front of Hattie's house. He and Vivian hurried up the porch steps where Hattie waited, still shaken, but composed. "Are you all right?" Calder asked, examining the destroyed camera. "I'm angry, not hurt," Hattie said. "He threatened me, said I should take the money while it's still being offered." Vivian carefully collected pieces of the broken camera. "This is blatant intimidation." "He doesn't know about the second camera," Calder said quietly, reaching up to the porch light fixture. He carefully removed the decorative cover to reveal a tiny lens built into what appeared to be a normal light fixture. "You clever boy," Hattie said with admiration. Calder connected his phone to the hidden camera's feed and pulled up the footage. The three of them huddled around the screen, watching the entire confrontation in high definition. Ryder's uninvited entry, his threats about condemnation, the deliberate destruction of property. Everything captured with crystal clear audio. Vivian's expression hardened. "This is perfect evidence." Calder's face was a storm of controlled anger as he replayed the moment where Ryder threatened Hattie. "This is no longer just suspicion," he said, his voice quiet but fierce. "We have him on record abusing his authority and threatening a senior citizen." The morning light streamed through the blinds in Calder's townhouse as he hunched over his laptop. The footage from Hattie's porch played on the screen. Officer Ryder's threatening posture, his deliberate destruction of property, his thinly veiled threats, all captured in high definition. Vivian paced behind him, phone to her ear. "We need to file this with Internal Affairs, the district attorney, and possibly the FBI Civil Rights Division," she said, hanging up. "This is textbook abuse of power." Calder nodded, typing rapidly. "I'm drafting the public complaint now. By tomorrow, everyone will see exactly who Officer Kane Ryder really is." Vivian's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and frowned. "Calder, you need to see this." She handed him her phone open to the Mercy Heights Observer website. The headline made his stomach drop. "Local police confront. Aggressive driver in gentrification dispute." Calder scrolled through the article, his jaw tightening. The piece quoted extensively from Ryder's official police report, describing Calder as hostile and uncooperative during the Ferrari arrest. It painted Ryder as a professional officer, protecting the neighborhood from outside agitators, disrupting community improvement efforts. "This is a complete fabrication," Calder said, his voice tight. "They leaked the report to control the narrative before we could release the footage." "It gets worse," Vivian said, pointing to a paragraph near the end that connected Calder's foundation to radical housing activists who opposed necessary neighborhood improvements. Calder's phone rang. The caller ID showed one of his foundation's largest donors. "Mr. Thorne, we need to discuss recent developments," the donor said without preamble. "Several board members are concerned about the foundation being associated with police confrontations." "The report is false," Calder said firmly. "I have video evidence." "Perhaps we should pause our contribution until things cool down," the donor interrupted. "We support your mission, but controversy isn't what we signed up for." 2 more calls followed, both donors expressing similar concerns. By noon, Calder's foundation had lost commitments for nearly $200,000 in funding. "They're trying to isolate us," Vivian observed, reviewing notes from each call. Cut off the money, turn public opinion, and make the residents feel helpless. Calder drove to Mercy Street, knuckles white on the steering wheel of his modest backup car. He'd left the Ferrari home, unwilling to draw additional attention. Neighbors who had greeted him warmly yesterday now watched cautiously from their windows. The article had done its job. At Hattie's house, he found her sitting on her porch swing, a newspaper folded in her lap. "I see you found their hit piece," he said, taking a seat beside her. Hattie nodded. "They're calling you dangerous now. Yesterday you were their honored guest." Calder rubbed his temples. "Donors are backing away. People are scared to be associated with me." "Baby, they only called you dangerous when you stopped being useful," Hattie said, patting his hand. "Yesterday, you were their successful black man they could put on brochures. Today, you're questioning power, so they need to make you the threat." Her words struck him deep. "I never wanted this fight. None of us did. But here we are. So what now? You going to let them scare you off with a nasty article?" Calder's phone buzzed with a text from Vivian. "Don't release all the footage yet. Strategic approach needed. Meet me at your place in an hour." When Vivian arrived, she laid out her strategy. "We released just enough of the footage to force official attention. Ryder threatening Hattie, but not the part about the property list. Keep our strongest evidence in reserve." "Why not show everything?" Calder asked. "Because they'll prepare excuses, lose evidence, coordinate stories," Vivian explained. "We need them to commit to one lie before we show them the next piece of truth." Calder's phone buzzed in. Buzz it again. Unknown number. "Officer Croft here. Ryder's report is completely false. You weren't hostile. There's a pressure property list. Need to talk privately." Calder showed Vivian the text. "Could be a trap," she warned. "Or our first witness from inside the system," Calder countered. He typed back. "How do I know it's you?" The reply came quickly. "I was the officer standing behind Ryder. You asked for my badge number. I was wearing number 4872. You had a scar on your right hand. No one else would know these details." Calder confirmed the details were accurate. Croft suggested meeting somewhere private, away from police cameras and patrols, behind the community center. "Midnight," Calder typed. "Come alone." "This is risky," Vivian cautioned. "So is doing nothing while they take Hattie's home," Calder replied. "Naomi would have taken the meeting." Vivian nodded. "I'll be nearby just in case." Calder looked down at his phone as Croft confirmed. "Midnight. I'll bring proof." Near midnight, behind the Mercy Street Community Center, Calder and Vivian waited beneath a flickering security light. The community center's back lot was empty except for their car parked in shadow. Wind pushed trash across the cracked pavement. Every passing car made them tense. "He's late," Vivian whispered, checking the time. Calder nodded. 5 more minutes, then we leave." The sound of cautious footsteps made them both turn. Officer Julian Croft appeared at the edge of the light, wearing jeans and a gray hoodie instead of his uniform. His eyes darted nervously from shadow to shadow. "I shouldn't be here," Croft said, staying near the wall. "If anyone finds out." "But you came," Calder said, "because you know what Ryder did was wrong." Croft wiped sweat from his forehead despite the cool night. "It wasn't just wrong. It was planned. Ryder had your name before he ever pulled you over." Vivienne stepped forward. "How do you know that?" "I was in the car when dispatch called," Croft explained, his voice barely above a whisper. "There was no stolen vehicle report. Ryder just said, 'That's him,' when he saw you at Cole's house." Calder felt a cold certainty settle over him. Hattie's address was marked. Croft nodded. Her house and about 20 others. They call it the holdout list. Residents who won't sell. He pulled a folded paper from his pocket with shaking hands. This isn't the original. That's locked in Crow's office. But I copied addresses during shift change. And Captain Crow knows about this? Vivian asked. Knows about it. He coordinates it. Croft looked over his shoulder again. Weekly meetings with someone from the city planning office. They update the list. Then Ryder and 2 other officers get assigned to do community checks at those addresses. Community checks? Calder repeated bitterly. You mean harassment? Call it whatever you want. It works. 7 homeowners sold in the last month. Croft pulled another folded paper from his pocket. I also have a copy of your arrest report. The real one, before Ryder rewrote it. It shows you were completely cooperative. Before he could hand over the papers, Croft's phone lit up. He flinched as it vibrated repeatedly in his hand. The screen showed 4 missed calls. His face went pale as he checked the messages. What is it? Calder asked. Internal affairs, Croft whispered, suddenly backing away. They've opened a complaint against me, filed this evening. Excessive force claim from last week. He looked up, eyes wide with fear. This isn't random. Someone knows I'm talking to you. Brooks, Croft, wait, Vivian said. We can protect you as a whistleblower. You don't understand, he said, shoving the papers back into his pocket. My wife is pregnant. We have a mortgage. They can destroy us. At least give us the documents, Calder urged. Croft shook his head. They'll know it came from me. The timing would be too obvious. He backed toward the street. I'll find another way to get them to you, somewhere they can't track. When? Vivian pressed. Soon, I promise, but I need to go now. Croft turned and hurried toward his car parked a block away. Calder moved to follow him, but Vivian grabbed his arm. Let him go, she said. He's scared. They watched Croft's taillights disappear around the corner. Less than a minute later, a dark sedan with tinted windows cruised slowly past the alley entrance. It made no sound as it passed, but Calder felt its presence like a physical weight. We're being watched, he whispered. Not just watched, Vivian said. They're sending a message. The sedan circled back, passing the alley entrance a second time. Its headlights swept across them briefly before it continued down the street. How high does this go? Calder wondered aloud. High enough to scare a cop into silence, Vivian replied. High enough to monitor us tonight. They waited until the street seemed clear, then hurried to their car. Vivian drove while Calder watched for followers. They took 3 extra turns and doubled back once before feeling safe enough to speak again. Croft confirmed it, Calder said. There's an organized pressure campaign against these homeowners, and it goes up to Captain Crow. But we still have no proof, Vivian reminded him. Nothing we can take to court or the media. Croft will come through, Calder said, though he wasn't sure he believed it does. Maybe, Vivian said, but we can't count on that. We need to find our own evidence. Calder thought of Hattie, Bernard Hale, Celine Vargas, all the elderly residents who might lose their homes within weeks if they couldn't stop this. Naomi had more, he said suddenly. She must have. She was too thorough not to have backup. By the time Vivian dropped him at his townhouse, the eastern sky was showing the first hint of dawn. Calder went straight to his office where Naomi's remaining boxes waited. He'd only gone through half of them. Kneeling beside the stack, he opened the next one and began sorting through folders, legal pads, and old recordings. Somewhere in these boxes was the proof they needed. The evidence Naomi had been collecting before her death. Help me find it, he whispered to her memory as the first light of morning crept through his window. Sunlight crept through the blinds of Calder's home office as dawn broke over the city. He hadn't slept. Naomi's files covered every inch of his desk. Folders, notes, and photographs spilled across the polished wood surface. The soft glow of his laptop illuminated his tired face as he pressed play on another voice recording from Naomi's digital recorder. Interview 17. Naomi's voice filled the quiet room. March 4th, with former code inspector Thomas Reynolds. Calder closed his eyes. Her voice still felt like a knife to his chest. Clear, determined, alive. He hadn't been able to listen to these recordings since her death months ago. Now he couldn't stop. Mr. Reynolds, you mentioned pressure to flag certain properties. Can you explain? A nervous male voice responded. Look, it wasn't official policy, but we knew which streets to focus on. Captain Crow would have officers present during inspections on Mercy Street, Cherry Avenue, and Walnut Row. Never happened in other neighborhoods. Calder grabbed a notepad, writing Crow direct involvement with a thick underline. The recording continued. Did Councilwoman Quinn ever contact your department directly? Not me personally, Reynolds answered. But my supervisor met with her twice monthly. After those meetings, we'd get lists of priority enforcement properties, always in neighborhoods marked for redevelopment. Calder's pen froze mid-word. He played the section again, then rifled through more files until he found a folder marked City Connections. Inside was a spreadsheet tracking meetings between code enforcement and Quinn's office. Next to it lay a list of addresses with Hattie's home circled in red. He clicked on another audio file. Interview 23, April 12th. Subject requested anonymity. Assistant to Paul Sutter, Meridian Development Group. A woman's frightened voice spoke quietly. Mr. Sutter calls them softening visits. Police show up, make residents nervous. Then we offer cash. Always below market value. He says it's just business, but it feels wrong. Calder's heart pounded as he opened Naomi's digital calendar. He scrolled back through time, through the months after she died, until he reached the week before the accident. There it was, a meeting scheduled with someone named Martin Kay, city inspector, 2 days before the crash that took her life. Oh, Naomi, he whispered, his voice breaking. There was no evidence connecting her death to this investigation. The accident report described a rainy night, a slick road, a truck that crossed the center line. But the timing stabbed at him. She'd been so close to putting it all together. While he'd been lost in grief, people like Hattie were being squeezed out of their homes. The work Naomi had dedicated herself to had gone unfinished. The front door opened and closed. Footsteps approached the office. Calder, Vivian called. In here, he answered, not taking his eyes off the screen. Vivian entered, carrying coffee and a legal folder. She stopped when she saw the state of the room and Calder's face. You found something, she said. It wasn't a question. Everything. Calder gestured at the scattered evidence. Naomi had almost the entire picture. Captain Crow coordinating with code enforcement, Quinn feeding addresses to both, developer representatives making offers after police visits. He played her fragments of the recordings. Vivian set the coffee down and examined the files with practiced eyes. This establishes the pattern we suspected, she said. But we need more recent evidence that's admissible in court. We have Hattie's porch video, that's a start. Vivian nodded. I can file for an emergency injunction based on harassment and due process violations. The 30-day condemnation window Quinn pushed through violates state law on reasonable remediation periods. Calder stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the neighborhood was waking up. An elderly man shuffled to get his newspaper. A young mother hurried children toward a waiting school bus. They thought no one would fight for this place, he said quietly. They didn't count on you, Vivian replied. They didn't count on Naomi. Calder turned back to the desk. She left us the map. We just need to follow it. He spread out Naomi's marked map of Mercy Street. Red circles identified targeted homes. Yellow highlighted investor purchases. Blue marked properties with multiple code violations. The pattern was unmistakable. A systematic clearing of the neighborhood from east to west. Hattie's home sat in the center of the remaining red circles. Calder placed his hand on the map over the neighborhood where he'd grown up, where Naomi had fought for justice, where Hattie still refused to leave. We released the porch footage today, he decided. File the injunction immediately. Make it public before they can bury it. Vivienne nodded, already reaching for her phone. Calder looked once more at Naomi's handwriting across the top of the map. They can't take what isn't for sale. His fingers traced the words as he made a silent promise to his wife. I'll finish what you started. That afternoon, Vivienne filed the emergency injunction at the county courthouse, while Calder uploaded the edited footage of Ryder threatening Hattie to social media. The video showed Ryder on Hattie's porch, his face clear in the porch light's glow. You should take the offer before the city takes the house. Ryder's voice rang clearly through the speaker. Hattie's response was just as clear. This home is not for sale. Then came the moment when Ryder spotted the camera and smashed it with his flashlight. Calder carefully edited out any personal identifying information for Hattie's safety, but left the address visible enough that city officials would know exactly which property was involved. He tagged local news stations, civil rights organizations, and the mayor's office. Within an hour, the video had been shared thousands of times. By mid-afternoon, 3 local news stations had run segments on it. By evening, the regularly scheduled city council meeting had become standing room only, with residents from Mercy Street filling every available space. I've never seen it like this, Bernard Hale whispered to Calder as they squeezed into seats near the front. The older widower's hands trembled slightly as he clutched a folder containing his violation notices. That's the point, Calder replied. They never wanted us all in one room. Councilwoman Amara Quinn sat at the center of the long desk at the front, her usually composed face tight with strain. Captain Crow stood near the side door, arms crossed, watching the crowd with careful eyes. When public comment opened, Hattie was the first to the microphone. She stood straight despite her recent hospital stay, her voice clear and strong. My name is Hattie Cole. I changed bandages at County Hospital for 40 years. I paid my taxes on time for 53 years. I buried my husband in this city. She paused, eyes sweeping the council. And I will not be bullied out of my own home by men hiding behind paperwork. The room erupted in applause. Quinn tapped her gavel ineffectively. Wanubayan. Residents approached the microphone. Celine Vargas presented her teaching credentials, alongside her code violations. Bernard shakily held up photos of his children growing up in the house he was now told needed $14,000 in repairs. Where am I supposed to get that kind of money? He asked, his voice cracking. And why wasn't it a problem last year or the year before? With each testimony, Quinn's composure crumbled further. Twice she tried to limit comment time. Twice the crowd shouted her down. Finally, Captain Crow approached the podium. The room quieted. In light of the video circulating online, Officer Ryder has been placed on administrative leave, pending a full departmental review, he announced, his voice professionally measured. The department takes allegations of misconduct seriously. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Crow continued, We will cooperate fully with any investigation into these complaints. His words were perfect, Calder noted. Too perfect. Practiced. The captain's eyes never connected with anyone in the audience. Near the end of the meeting, a clerk approached the council with a message. Quinn read it silently, her face falling. I've just been informed, she said stiffly, that Judge Wilson has granted a temporary stay on all code enforcement condemnation actions in the Mercy Street district for 1 week, pending review. The crowd erupted. People hugged, cried, clasped hands. Bernard's shoulders sagged with relief. Outside City Hall, the mood turned celebratory. Neighbors who had lived in fear for months embraced on the steps. Local news cameras captured the jubilant scene. "We did it," Hattie said, squeezing Calder's arm. "We really did it." Calder smiled, but he felt Vivian's eyes on him. "This is only temporary," she warned quietly, standing slightly apart from the celebration. "1 week doesn't solve the underlying problem, and cornered people often become most dangerous." "I know," Calder replied, "but they needed this moment." As the crowd began to disperse, Hattie looked tired. Her brief hospital stay had taken more out of her than she would admit. "Let me drive you home," Calder offered. She nodded gratefully. As they pulled away from City Hall in the Ferrari, Hattie closed her eyes, finally allowing herself to relax. "Naomi would be proud of you," she murmured. Calder felt a tightness in his chest at the mention of his wife's name. "She'd be proud of all of us." They drove in comfortable silence through the darkening streets. As they turned onto Mercy Street, Hattie suddenly sat up straight. "Calder, look," she said, pointing ahead. In the distance, against the night sky, a column of black smoke rose thick and menacing. "That's coming from the community center," Calder said, pressing down on the accelerator. The Ferrari surged forward as both of them watched the smoke climb higher into the evening air. The Ferrari screeched to a halt, a block from the community center. Red and blue lights flashed across Mercy Street as fire trucks blocked the road ahead. Calder and Hattie jumped out, rushing toward the chaos on foot. Thick black smoke billowed from the rear of the building. Bright orange flames licked at the windows of what Calder knew was the foundation office, where they'd stored resident complaint files and Naomi's research. "No, no, no," Hattie whispered, her hand covering her mouth. Residents from all over the neighborhood stood behind police tape, watching in horror as firefighters battled the blaze. Selene Vargas clutched Bernard Hale's arm, both their faces illuminated by the dancing flames. Calder ducked under the tape, Hattie following close behind. "Sir, you can't go past here," a firefighter shouted. "That's my building," Calder said, his voice tight with urgency. "Is everyone out? Was anyone inside?" "Building was empty when we arrived," the firefighter confirmed. "We've got it contained to the back section, but there's heavy damage to the rear office." Calder's stomach knotted. The rear office where all their documentation was stored. The files. The evidence. Naomi's research. "This ain't no accident," someone muttered in the crowd. A news van pulled up, its bright light sweeping over the scene. A reporter Calder recognized, the same one who'd written the hit piece against him, was already thrusting a microphone toward a man in a city inspector's jacket. "Initial assessment?" the reporter asked. The inspector, a thin man with a clipboard, didn't hesitate. "Appears to be electrical in nature, substandard wiring in the office area, possibly overloaded circuits from recent renovations." Calder froze. The foundation had done no electrical work. The building systems had been professionally updated and inspected just after purchase. "Are you suggesting negligence by the building's owner?" the reporter pressed. "Can't rule it out," the inspector said, glancing directly at Calder. "Especially given the rushed nature of the recent work." The camera swung toward Calder, capturing his shock and anger. "That's a lie," Calder said loudly. "There was no recent electrical work. The building was fully certified." Hattie's sudden gasp cut him off. She swayed beside him, clutching her chest. "Hattie." Calder turned, catching her as her knees buckled. "Can't breathe right," she managed, her face contorted in pain. "We need help!" Calder shouted, lowering her gently to the ground. "Someone call an ambulance." Within minutes, paramedics pushed through the crowd. They worked quickly, checking Hattie's vitals, administering oxygen, and lifting her onto a stretcher. "BP's elevated, possible cardiac event," one paramedic said to another. "Let's move." "I'm coming with her," Calder insisted, following them to the ambulance. He looked back at the burning building, then spotted Vivian pushing through the crowd. "Vivian, Hattie's going to the hospital. Stay here. Find out everything you can about this fire," he called out. Don't let them touch anything until we have our own inspector. Vivian nodded, already pulling out her phone as she approached the fire chief. The ambulance ride was a blur of sirens and Hattie's labored breathing. Calder held her hand, whispering reassurances he wasn't sure he believed. At Memorial Hospital, doctors whisked Hattie away for tests while Calder paced the waiting room, making calls. First to Hattie's daughter in Atlanta, then to the foundation's lawyers, demanding their own fire investigator. An hour later, a doctor informed him Hattie was stable. Not a heart attack, but stress-induced cardiac symptoms they needed to monitor overnight. She's asking for you, the doctor added. Calder followed him down the sterile hallway, pausing at the sound of a familiar voice. Rough night for the neighborhood hero. Officer Ryder leaned against the wall near the nurse's station, arms crossed. Despite being on administrative leave, he wore his uniform. "What are you doing here?" Calder demanded, keeping his voice low. "Checking on a citizen in distress," Ryder said with a smirk. "That's my job after all. You're supposed to be on leave." Ryder shrugged. "Paperwork's slow. Besides, when I heard Ms. Cole was brought in, I wanted to make sure she was all right, being a public servant and all." He stepped closer to Calder, dropping his voice. "You know, all this could have been avoided if you just kept driving in your shiny car. Not everyone's cut out for saving the world." Something snapped inside Calder. His hand shot out, grabbing Ryder's collar and pushing him against the wall. The officer's eyes widened with shock, then narrowed with satisfaction. "That's what I was hoping for," Ryder whispered. "Assaulting an officer in a hospital. That'll play well." "Calder, stop!" Vivian's voice cut through the tension. She strode down the hallway, her heels clicking sharply against the linoleum. "Let him go, now!" Calder released Ryder's collar, stepping back as his hands trembled with rage. "Officer Ryder," Vivian said coldly, "I suggest you leave immediately unless you'd like me to file a harassment complaint with the state licensing board. Your administrative leave status makes your presence here highly questionable." Ryder straightened his uniform, the smirk never leaving his face. "Just checking on a community member." He walked backward a few steps. "Give Miss Cole my regards. Hope she feels better soon." With a mock salute, he disappeared around the corner. Vivian grabbed Calder's arm. "The fire chief wouldn't commit to anything, but I've got our own investigator coming first thing tomorrow. Don't give Ryder what he wants." Calder nodded, his jaw tight. Together, they entered Hattie's room. Hattie lay small against the white sheets, an oxygen tube in her nose and monitors beeping beside her. She opened her eyes as they approached. "They burned it all, didn't they?" she asked weakly. "Not everything," Vivian said. "The fire was contained to the back office." Hattie's hand shot out, grasping Calder's with surprising strength. Her eyes were clear and fierce despite her condition. "Don't you dare get polite now," she whispered. Smoke hung in the air like a ghost. Calder stood in the doorway of his office at the community center, staring at the destruction. Water from fire hoses pooled on the floor, turning documents into soggy pulp. The acrid smell burned his nostrils. "We shouldn't stay long," Vivian said, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. "The structure hasn't been cleared yet." Calder nodded, but stepped inside anyway. The fire had gutted the back office where they'd stored resident testimonies and violation notices. Shelves had collapsed. File boxes lay in charred heaps. "This wasn't an accident," he said quietly. "I know," Vivian's voice was tight, "but we need proof, not just suspicion." Calder moved toward a metal filing cabinet that had partially protected some items beneath it. He crouched down, ignoring the water soaking into his pant legs, and pulled out a small lockbox. It was dented, but intact. "Naomi's recorder," he whispered. "She kept it in a fireproof case." His hands trembled as he turned the small key still attached to his keyring. The metal box opened with a click, revealing a digital recorder and several memory cards sealed in plastic. "Is it damaged?" Vivian asked. Moving closer, Calder pressed the power button. A small green light flickered on. It works. Something like hope flickered in his chest. Let's get out of here. They drove to Calder's townhouse in silence, both too exhausted for conversation. The digital clock on the dashboard showed the early hours. Hattie was stable, but would remain hospitalized for observation. The doctors had warned that stress could trigger another cardiac event. Inside his living room, Calder connected the recorder to his laptop while Vivian made strong coffee. The device contained dozens of audio files, each meticulously labeled with dates and names. She was always more organized than me, Calder said softly as the files loaded. Vivian placed a steaming mug beside him. Naomi built cases like fortresses. Nothing left to chance. They played the first recording. Naomi's voice filled the room. Calm, precise, professional. Calder closed his eyes for a moment, letting the familiar cadence wash over him. Interview with Bernard Hale, March 12th. Naomi's voice said, "Mr. Hale, can you describe when you first received code violation notices?" An elderly man's voice responded, explaining how citations began 2 weeks after refusing an investor's offer. 3 days after the citation, Officer Ryder had knocked on his door late at night, claiming a neighbor reported suspicious activity. File after file revealed the same pattern. Minor violations followed refusals to sell. Police visits increased pressure. Offers always decreased after citations. "Listen to this one," Vivian said, clicking a file labeled Source X Parks Department. A nervous man explained how certain addresses were flagged for priority enforcement after development planning meetings. Captain Crow received these lists directly from Councilwoman Quinn's office. "Jesus," Calder muttered. The most damning recording came in the early hours. A developer's assistant caught on tape explaining how Officer Ryder received payments through a security consulting arrangement for special attention to certain properties. "This is enough for the State Attorney General," Vivian said, rubbing her eyes. Calder nodded, but exhaustion had settled into his bones. "If they don't burn this evidence too." Vivian sat up suddenly. "Wait, the last time I saw Naomi, she mentioned creating backups." She pulled out her phone, scrolling through her calendar. "We met for coffee 2 weeks before the accident. She said she was mailing me something for safekeeping." "Did she?" "I think so." A package arrived after. Lena paused. "After the funeral. I couldn't bring myself to open anything related to her cases. Then it should be in our archived storage." Without another word, they drove to Vivian's office downtown. The security guard recognized her and let them in despite the hour. In the basement file room, Vivian pulled out a banker's box labeled Grant Nall. Inside was a sealed manila envelope with Vivian's name written in Naomi's neat handwriting. Vivian sliced it open with a letter opener. "Oh, Naomi," she whispered. The package contained multiple USB drives, printed email threads between Quinn and developers, call logs showing Crow's direct line contacting investors after enforcement actions, and a detailed timeline connecting code violations to police visits and lowered offers. Calder spread the documents across the conference table as pink light began filtering through the windows. Dawn had arrived. "This isn't just random corruption," Vivian said, organizing papers into evidence categories. "This is systematic displacement using public institutions as weapons." She gathered the most critical documents into her briefcase and faced Calder. "We don't have a complaint anymore," she said firmly. "We have a case." 2 days passed in a blur of depositions, affidavits, and hospital visits. Calder spent mornings with state investigators, afternoons checking on Hattie's recovery, and evenings updating Mercy Street residents. Vivian barely slept, preparing legal filings that would protect the neighborhood long after the immediate crisis ended. By Wednesday morning, Calder was ready. He stood before the mirror, adjusting the same green suit he'd worn when Ryder arrested him. The color reminded him of Naomi, her favorite, and the promise he'd made at her funeral to protect what she valued. Today, he would keep that promise. "You sure about this location?" Vivian asked as she gathered files. "The community center is still cordoned off as a fire scene." "That's exactly why it needs to happen there," Calder replied. "Let them see what they tried to destroy." Yellow caution tape fluttered around the damaged building when Calder pulled the red Ferrari to the curb at exactly the appointed hour. Cameras clicked as he stepped out, the visual deliberately mirroring the day of his arrest. Folding chairs had been arranged in a half circle facing a small podium. Behind it stood a portable speaker system and a projection screen. Residents filed in first, followed by local reporters. Hattie had insisted on attending, despite her doctor's objections. Bernard Hale pushed her wheelchair to the front row. The neighborhood formed a protective circle around her. "This meeting isn't what they think it is," Vivian whispered to Calder as Captain Crow arrived with 2 uniformed officers. "They believe we're negotiating surrender terms." Councilwoman Amara Quinn approached with an aide, her smile tight and professional. She nodded to Calder as though they were colleagues on equal footing. "Mr. Thorne," she said loudly enough for nearby reporters to hear, "I'm pleased we can discuss reasonable accommodations for the neighborhood while still moving forward with necessary improvements." Calder didn't answer. His eyes had locked on a figure at the edge of the gathering. Officer Ryder in civilian clothes, but unmistakable, with his squared shoulders and contemptuous smirk. Despite administrative leave, he'd come to watch what he assumed would be Calder's capitulation. The murmuring crowd quieted as Calder approached the podium. Behind him, Vivian connected her laptop to the projector, while an assistant attorney general from the state's Civil Rights Division took position near the side entrance. 3 days ago, I stood in handcuffs beside my car, while Officer Ryder told me, "If that's your Ferrari, I'll quit." Calder began, his voice steady and clear. "Today, I return in the same car, wearing the same suit, to tell this neighborhood the truth about why that happened." Captain Crow shifted uncomfortably. Quinn's smile had vanished. "Officer Ryder didn't stop me because my car looked suspicious," Calder continued. "He stopped me because I was parked outside Hattie Cole's house, a house on what they call the list." Ryder pushed forward through the crowd. "You think having money makes you special?" he called out. "You're just playing hero for a neighborhood you abandoned years ago." The crowd parted as Ryder approached the front, exactly as Calder had anticipated. "No," Calder replied calmly. "It needed honest men in uniform. Since it didn't get them, it got me instead." Ryder stepped closer, jaw tight. "You think money makes you untouchable?" "No," Calder said, his voice dropping lower. "Evidence does." He nodded to Vivian, who pressed play. Suddenly, Naomi's clear voice filled the air. October 15th. Interview with Parks Department employee regarding priority enforcement properties. The recording continued, revealing how addresses were flagged after development meetings. Then came the developer's assistant describing Ryder's payments. Finally, the damning call logs between Crow's direct line and investors. The crowd fell silent. Ryder's face drained of color. From the back, Officer Julian Croft stepped forward in full uniform. The state attorney general's office had arranged his whistleblower protection the previous evening. "Officer Ryder falsified the arrest report for Mr. Thorne," Croft stated clearly. He claimed Mr. Thorne was aggressive and non-compliant, which was a lie. Captain Crow reviewed and approved that report, knowing it was false. And both of them knew about the pressure property list targeting Ms. Cole and other longtime residents. Councilwoman Quinn turned to leave, but found her path blocked by 2 state investigators. Ryder lunged towards the podium, but stopped when the Assistant Attorney General called out, "Officer Kane Ryder, please remain where you are." More state investigators moved through the stunned crowd, converging on Crow, who stood frozen in place. Hattie's voice rose above the growing commotion. "You laughed at the wrong man," she called to Ryder. "But worse than that, you picked on the wrong neighborhood." The residents of Mercy Street, so long intimidated into silence, began to applaud, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence as they watched Ryder, Crow, and Quinn surrounded by investigators. Justice, so long delayed, had finally arrived on Mercy Street. Ryder's face contorted with fury as he backed away from the podium. His eyes darted left and right, searching for an escape route through the crowd. When he turned to leave, 2 state investigators stepped directly into his path. "Officer Kane Ryder," the lead investigator announced loud enough for everyone to hear. "You are under arrest for falsifying official police reports, witness intimidation, evidence tampering, and corruption charges related to your private security arrangements." The crowd fell silent as an investigator pulled out handcuffs. The metallic click echoed across the gathering as they secured Ryder's wrists behind his back. The same humiliation he had inflicted on Calder weeks earlier now returned to him in front of the entire neighborhood. "This is ridiculous," Ryder sputtered, his face reddening. "You can't believe these people over a police officer." "We believe evidence, Officer Ryder," the investigator replied calmly. "And we have plenty." Captain Crow tried to maintain his composure, straightening his uniform as investigators approached him. His practiced smile disappeared when Vivian stepped forward with a folder. "Captain Harlan Crow," Vivian said, her voice steady and clear. "These are copies of call logs between your direct line and Parkview developers. And these," she held up printed emails, "show you coordinating enforcement priorities with Councilwoman Quinn's office, targeting specific homeowners who refused buyout offers." Crow's professional mask crumbled. "This is being taken completely out of context," he protested, as investigators escorted him toward a waiting vehicle. Unlike Ryder, they hadn't handcuffed him, but his career was equally finished. Councilwoman Amara Quinn attempted to slip away during the commotion, but a process server intercepted her at the edge of the crowd. "Councilwoman Amara Quinn," the server announced formally, "you are hereby served with notice of a civil action for conspiracy to violate civil rights." Cameras flashed as the papers were placed in her trembling hands. The neighborhood residents who had once feared these powerful figures now watched them fall one by one. Calder stood beside Hattie's wheelchair, her hand gripping his tightly as the arrests unfolded. "This isn't about revenge," he told the gathered reporters. "This is about protecting people's homes and their dignity." The state attorney general's representative approached Calder. "Mr. Thorne, I want to inform you personally that all charges related to your arrest have been formally dismissed and expunged from your record. And the redevelopment vote has been suspended, pending our full investigation." A cheer went up from the residents. Bernard Hale waved his violation notice in the air. "What about these? What about our homes?" "All targeted code enforcement actions are frozen," the representative confirmed. "And a state-level review of the entire inspection process will begin immediately." Hattie looked up at Calder, tears in her eyes. "Naomi would be proud," she whispered. Weeks later, the sun shone brightly on the newly rebuilt community center. A large banner hung across the front. "Grand opening, Naomi Thorne Senior Justice Center," where charred beams had once stood. Fresh paint gleamed. The crowd gathered for the ribbon cutting was twice the size of the one that had witnessed the arrests. Local television crews positioned their cameras as Hattie, fully recovered from her hospital stay, rolled forward in her wheelchair with a large pair of scissors. "This center," Hattie announced to applause, "will make sure what happened to us never happens to anyone else." She cut the ribbon with a flourish as the crowd erupted in cheers. Inside, The renovated building housed offices for legal clinics, home repair grant administration, property tax counseling, and a dedicated hotline for reporting police misconduct. Photos of Mercy Street's history lined the walls, and in the main meeting room hung a portrait of Naomi Thorne, smiling and determined. Calder walked through the center, stopping to shake hands with residents. The past weeks had brought dramatic changes. Quinn had resigned under mounting pressure. A special election was scheduled. The police department had begun an outside investigation of its practices. Croft had been reinstated and was becoming a key witness in the ongoing corruption case. After the ceremony, Calder stepped outside into the afternoon sunlight. He walked to the curb where the red Ferrari waited, the same spot where Ryder had once handcuffed him. This time, there were no flashing lights, no accusations, no cuffs. Just neighbors, waving and smiling. A small boy, about 8 years old, approached hesitantly. "Mister," he said, pointing at the Ferrari. "Is that really your car?" Calder knelt to the child's level. "Yes, it is." The boy's eyes widened. "Can people like us have cars like that?" Calder placed a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. "People like us can own the car, the street, the building, the truth, and the future," he said softly. "Don't let anybody laugh you out of what's yours." Across the street, Hattie watched from the center's doorway, her eyes glistening with pride as she witnessed Calder pass this message to the next generation. The neighborhood that had once been marked for destruction now stood as a monument to justice, resilience, and hope. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.